Once upon a time, there was a man and a woman who lived in perfect harmony. Zoe Quinn was an independent game developer who made an interactive fiction game about depression called Depression Quest. Aaron Joni was Zoe's ex-boyfriend and at one point was madly in love with her. The two matched on the dating site OkCupid and they began dating not long after. These two really hit it off, and on paper they seemed like a perfect match. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be because the fire in their relationship burned out about as quickly as a fireplace when you turn it off. In a perfect world, the fact that two grown adults broke up would be nobody's business but their own. In a perfect world, the fact that their relationship ended due to infidelity would be nobody's business but their own. In a perfect world, the intimate details of Zoe's private sex life would be nobody's business but her own. Sadly, we do not live in a perfect world. On August 16th, 2014, Aaron published a blog on WordPress titled The Zoe Post, where he accused Zoe of cheating on him with 5 different men that all worked in the video game industry. Only one of these men are relevant to this particular story, and that man is Nathan Grayson, who was a journalist that was working for Kotaku at the time. Some individuals within the gaming community began to genuinely believe that Zoe had slept her way to the top and accused her of having sex with Nathan in exchange for positive press coverage of Depression Quest. They also accused Nathan of violating journalistic ethics by not disclosing his relationship with Zoe in his review of the game. What started out as an uncomfortably detailed account of a messy breakup quickly spiraled out of control into a full-blown culture war regarding ethics in video game journalism and women in video games. How the hell did this all happen? How did GamerGate become one of the biggest internet scandals of the last decade? And what were the factors that caused this war to preserve ethics in video game journalism to turn into such an embarrassingly disastrous fiasco? Since 2024 marks the 10th anniversary of GamerGate, I've decided that now is as good a time as any to tell the complete story of one of the most notorious scandals of the 21st century. This is the story of GamerGate. Zoe Quinn was born in 1987 and grew up in a small town near the Adirondack Mountains in upstate New York. Zoe fell in love with video games at a very young age. She received her first game console, which was a Game Boy, and had saved up a summer's worth of allowance to buy a copy of The Lion King, and would later receive a copy of Pokemon. At the age of 12, she would be given a 3DO and 50 games from her dad. She played games like Night Trap, Balls, Way of the Warrior, and Star Control 2. She stole Nintendo Power magazines from her local library and would plaster images from the levels of the various games that were featured in the magazine and put them all over the walls of her bedroom. She went into the woods and pretended to be Samus from Super Metroid and would act out the story that she had created from the level layout she had on her wall. She also pretended that small rhubarb stalks were regular enemies and that the thicker ones were bosses that required a ton of extra hit points to take down. Her favorite game growing up was Commander Keen, which centered around an 8-year-old boy that builds his own spaceship and flies around the galaxy to protect Earth from aliens. I mention all of this because I wanted to make it abundantly clear that she was always genuinely passionate about the medium and that she was not a fake gamer in any way, shape, or form. After divorcing her husband at the age of 24, she moved from Albany, New York to Toronto, Ontario to pursue a career in photography. She had been living in the city for a while when she stumbled upon something that would change the course of her life forever. The something in question was a Facebook status update that was asking for applicants for a course that would teach women how to make a video game in just 6 weeks. Zoe signed up for this course without hesitation, and 6 weeks later, she completed her very first video game. It was at this point that she realized what she was truly meant to do. On February 14th, 2013, Zoe released a game called Depression Quest. As the name implies, depression Depression Quest is an interactive fiction game that centers around a young adult that suffers from depression. Zoe was diagnosed with depression when she was 14 and had tried to commit suicide when she was 12. Zoe and her co-writer Patrick Lindsay, who also suffers from depression, created the game as a way of communicating their shared experiences. While Depression Quest was originally released as a free, browser-based game, Zoe had also decided to submit the game through Steam Greenlight, and the response was not exactly supportive. As a matter of fact, the response that she received was so vitriolic that she withdrew her submission. Zoe would explain her reasoning as to why she pulled the game from Steam Greenlight in an article for Vice. "The first time I uploaded it to Greenlight, I figured it would go mostly smoothly, like hopefully okay. We already had 500,000 players at that point and a bunch of awards. When it hit Greenlight, people were leaving foul comments there, and suddenly I started getting stuff sent to my email. Oh, I saw your game on Greenlight and I hope you kill yourself. I guess somebody who thought they were really clever figured out my address and sent a very detailed rape threat to my house. That was when I decided to pull it off Greenlight. I just didn't have the emotional time and effort to spend on it. Putting something on Greenlight, you have to manage this whole campaign. It's exhausting when you also have people telling you that they want you to die." Part of the vitriol came from the fact that Depression Quest was not a video game in the traditional sense. It was less GTA, Sonic, and Mario, and more along the lines of a classic point-and-click choose-your-own-adventure game. Some people didn't see it as an actual video game, and they strongly believed that it shouldn't be on Steam. Unfortunately for those people, Zoe would change her mind and resubmit the game to Steam Greenlight. Part of it was just that, generally, I'm in a better place now. I thought since the game had gone into International Independent Game Festival Indiecade, people would respond to it a lot better. Willingly signing up for that experience again sucks. I hope people had gotten it out of their system. Mostly though, it came down to the fact that I talked to a lot of people who said that it helped them. I thought, honestly, I could take the hate if it meant the game could reach somebody who would get something out of it, feel less alone. That matters way more to me than the people who just spew hate ad hominem. It took me a long time, despite getting a ton of fan letters, to internalize that the game helped people. It took me a long time because of my own bullshit. As soon as I accepted that, it seemed silly to hold back. Depression Quest was officially greenlit in January 2014, and it was released on Steam on August 11th, 2014, which was unfortunately on the exact same day that Robin Williams committed suicide. Zoe considered delaying the Steam release because she was afraid that she would be accused of capitalizing on Robin's death, but she ultimately decided to move forward with the original release date. She didn't know it at the time, but being accused of capitalizing on the death of a beloved celebrity would be the least of her worries. On August 16th, 2014, Zoe's ex-boyfriend Aaron Joni published a blog on WordPress titled The Zoe Post. To say that this blog was incredibly devastating to Zoe's reputation would be an understatement. The blog was a scathing tirade that extensively detailed how Aaron and Zoe's relationship fell apart. What made it even more explosive was the fact that Aaron had accused Zoe of cheating on him with 5 different men, all of whom worked in the video game industry. One of these 5 guys was Nathan Grayson, who was a journalist that was working for Kotaku at the time. People began to accuse Zoe of having sex with Nathan in exchange for positive press coverage of Depression Quest. To the surprise of absolutely no one, Nathan vehemently denied the allegations, while Zoe defiantly refused to address the allegations against her. The idea that I am required to debunk a manifesto of my sexual past written by an openly malicious ex-boyfriend in order to continue participating in this industry is horrifying, and I won't do it. It's a personal matter that never should have been made public, and I don't want to delve into personal shit, mine or anyone else's, while saying that people's love and sex lives are no one's business. I'm not going to talk about it. I will never talk about it. It is not your goddamned business. This is another example of gendered violence whereby my personal life becomes a means to punish my professional credentials and to try to shame me into giving up my work. I'm still committed to doing my small part to create a world where no woman is at risk of experiencing this. That said, I am thankful that even boards with a reputation for being the most hostile hostile places online have been able to tell the intent behind these threads and ban them outright, seeing the hate speech for what it is, and not news for what it is. The fire surrounding Zoe and Nathan would get turned up to 11 when a YouTuber named Mundane Matt made a video titled Hell Hath No Fury Like a Lover's Scorn, where he talked about some of the contents of the Zoe post.
I dated Zoe Quinn. I thought she was the most amazing, kind-hearted person in the world. Turns out she was bullshitting pretty much everything I fell in love with her for, and is actually an unbelievable jerk. She effortlessly lied to and manipulated for months, simply because it was not believable that someone could be that selfish as a person, that convincing of a liar, and that good of a manipulator. While adamantly arguing the very principles she espoused, here are some of the things she did / does in no particular order or tense, which you can verify using the chat log images in the footer of Act 1. And there are quite a number of those chat log images. Like I said, they're a good read. You're going to look at probably about 10 minutes per one, just to read it and to understand the context. So yeah, let's get into this here. Number 1, spend quite a bit of time talking about how she would never ever cheat on anyone because that violates sexual consent, all while cheating on me. Number 2, with Nathan Grayson. 3, with Robin Arnott. 4, with Joshua Boggs. Number 5, who is both her boss and married. Number 6, and at least 2 others whose names are censored, and very probably more, but I won't get into why I believe that. 7, as opposed to informing Joshua's wife, primarily freak out about her own career if his wife goes public. 8, do her goddamn hardest to make sure I didn't sleep with anyone but her while we were broken up. Inevitably succeed. Number 9, sleep with a bunch of people while we were broken up, ignoring all the strong principled stances she used to convince me not to. 10, pretend we didn't need to use protection whenever we had sex while we were broken up. 11, or while we were together. 12, basically demand I ostracize my friend who was going through some seriously fucked up shit because that friend had sort of showed a tentative interest in me while we were broken up. 13, have no problem choosing to work for Joshua Boggs after cheating on me with him and after finding out about his wife. 14, spend an hour arguing that she would never lie in a relationship while she was lying about all the things in our relationship. Number 15, stop at pretty much no length to prevent me from finding out the truth. If I had to lose 10 pounds to bouts of panic attacks spent questioning my own sanity for a sleepless week of being ostracized so she could spend that time cheating on me, well, that's unfortunate for me, but the important thing is that I'm not around to make things awkward between her and the flavor of the week. 16, totally make 2 people up to divert suspicion from the fact that she was fucking Nathan. Seriously, she made 2 people up. This probably doesn't deserve its own item list, but like the claim that there were 2 additional people crashing with her was one of the things that made me think I couldn't possibly have been right to worry during the panic attack week, because who the hell would just fabricate people? 17, later go on to ostracize Nathan for a week simply so she could fuck some other guys. Number 18, have unprotected sex with me like 12 freaking hours after cheating on me with her boss. Number 19, express remorse really damn well, really damn often, and only about the specific thing she has been caught doing. Express no remorse about anything she hasn't been caught doing yet. Lie in literally the same breath she is expressing remorse about having lied, which isn't to say her remorse is fake. I can't know if it is or isn't. It sure looks and sounds real enough. It's just to say that her remorse doesn't actually mean anything in terms of our future intent. She'll promise to never do something again in a fit of despair and regret, and then do that thing like an hour later. Number 21, lie a fucking lot. Like, holy shit, how more often can one person possibly lie? At one point, she actually lies about a lie, about a lie, about a lie. It's like liception. I made that part up. Number 22, a bunch of other fucked up things I'm not even going to bother researching the legal ramifications of telling you about. Okay. Number 23, after making a grand show of remorse and expressing a desire to make all of this up to me, go on to ostracize me, because doing the right thing and making it up to me isn't worth the risk that I might go public with any additional admissions if we have to talk things out online. Number 24, be really fucking good at pretending to be worth looking up to. And at the end of it, I still can't stop referring to Zoe Quinn as Burgers and Fries. If you know the restaurant Five Guys Burger and Fries, that's what he kind of refers to her as.
Zoe decided to fight back by filing a false DMCA claim against Matt's video. This made absolutely no sense because there was nothing in it that could be copyrighted. The entire video had a still image from Depression Quest with the title right next to it and Matt's commentary overlaid on top of it, and the image was a publicly available one at that, so the claim had absolutely no merit. This ill-fated mistake only added fuel to the growing belief that Zoe Quinn was a shady and unethical person that slept her way to the top and was now doing extreme damage control in order to salvage her tarnished reputation. Total Biscuit wrote a twit longer post where he gave his thoughts about this entire ordeal, and it was posted to r/gaming, where the comments were deleted en masse. One of the moderators tweeted at Zoe, which did absolutely nothing to make the embattled Miss Quinn look good from a perception standpoint. GamesNosh published an article about the scandal, but they were forced to take it down at the request of their domain host. Fellow indie game developer Phil Fish, who was best known for creating the game Fez, came to Zoe's defense and publicly lambasted everyone that was attacking her. A group on 4chan who referred to themselves as Five Guys Burgers and Fries responded by hacking the website of his company Polytron, and to make matters worse, they left a download link that contained all of Phil's personal information, which included his address, his passwords, his bank balance, his bank account information, and his numerous alleged email accounts. Several video game websites published articles where they proclaimed that the gamer identity was dead, and that the industry no longer needed to exclusively cater to the audience that got it to where it was, which was mostly white and mostly male. They were essentially saying that gamers were dead. To be absolutely clear, that phrase was never actually used in any of these articles, but the fact that they all had the same sentiment and were published around the same time gave Zoe and Nathan's detractors the impression that it was a coordinated attack against the gaming community as a whole, and it fueled their belief that video game journalism was corrupt and unethical. Just a few days later, even more fuel would be poured into this hot dumpster fire when a YouTuber by the name of Internet Aristocrat made a video where he lambasted Zoe, Nathan, and video game journalism as a whole.
Now, the interesting thing about the Zoe Post blog is that it chronicles and has captures of interactions on social media, and we get to see what kind of person Zoe Quinn is. And we get to see how she's a liar and a manipulator, and how the people at WizardChan who put together that album that's linked in the description weren't really bullshitting you when they said she's fucking making it up. Now, at the heart of the Zoe post, aside from all the things that Aaron wrote down about her, aside from her white lies and her omissions of truth, besides the deceitful behavior and manipulation, is the infidelity. And he names specifically 3 people in his post. He omits 2 names. Of course, due to technological wizardry of other people, those 2 names have been found. And so this is a list of 5 guys. And again, I'm not putting their names out there because I think it's wrong she cheated in a relationship. I'm putting those names out there to show you, or to start to show you, how corrupt gaming journalism and game development have become. These are the 5 guys. Now, to start with, on the very far right-hand side is Joshua Boggs. Now, he was her boss. She had sex with him while she was in a relationship with Aaron. The interesting thing is, Joshua Boggs is married. So not only was she having sex with her employer, she was having sex with a man who's married. This didn't cause her a crisis of conscience, even though she's made statements in the past on social media saying how wrong it is to have affairs, how terrible it is to cheat on somebody when you're married. But again, as a liar, she says one thing and does another. Some other names that are listed there are Robin Arnott and Kyle Pulver, both indie game devs. You have Brandon McCartan, multi-award winning indie game dev prodigy for Fez and Aquaria. That's interesting on its own for some things that happened just yesterday, but I'll get to that in a minute. But really, the biggest fucking issue that we're looking at right now is the name in the middle. Nathan Grayson. Who is Nathan Grayson? And why is it important we talk about his and Zoe's relationship? Nathan Grayson is a video game journalist. Nathan Grayson is somebody who wrote for Rock Paper Shotgun and currently writes for Kotaku. Nathan Grayson is somebody who has published positive pieces about Zoe's game, who has given her publicity, and who has marketed her product while having sex with her and not disclosing it. Now, there's a word for people when there's a professional conflict and they need to step back from what they do as a job because of conflicting things. It's called recusing oneself. Nathan Grayson not only did not recuse himself from writing the articles that fluffed up her product and promoted her, he went so far as to hide the fact that they had a relationship. Here you see an example of just 2 pieces he wrote this year, one on Rock Paper Shotgun and one on Kotaku, talking about her product and her specifically. This starts to show a pattern of behavior in game journalism. These people have no professional barrier which exists between their relationships. It's not just that game developers and game journalists have friendships, or that they communicate, or that they cooperate and do things together. They are having illicit sexual relationships which benefit one another. Nathan Grayson has benefited by being able to write an article that will get him clicks and thereby ad revenue. Zoe Quinn is able to get publicity and make money. It is a disgusting relationship, and it is the opposite of what journalism is meant to be.
By this point, the scandal involving Zoe Quinn was known simply as ZoeGate. That would change on August 27, 2014, when actor Adam Baldwin, who's best known for starring on the cult classic Fox show Firefly, tweeted about ZoeGate and would coin the term that we would all become very familiar with over the course of the next few months: GamerGate. The GamerGate scandal spiraled out of control in such a short amount of time that certain people that weren't even involved in it initially got dragged into it. One of those people was Anita Sarkeesian. On August 25, 2014, Anita published the latest installment of her Tropes vs. Women in video game series titled Woman as Background Decoration Part 2. Anita was already seen as a controversial figure by some in the gaming community because she was openly critical about the negative ways that women were portrayed in video games. Some gamers genuinely believed that Anita was going to ruin video games and reshape it to suit her particular worldview, aka a social justice warrior and feminist worldview. Because of all the things I just mentioned, Anita became another ideal target for GamerGate supporters. She was not only harassed, doxxed, and was forced to flee her own home, she was also bombarded with death threats, rape threats, and even bomb threats. The threats that were made against her became so vicious that the FBI had to step in and investigate. An anonymous individual wrote an email to Utah State University where Anita was planning to do a lecture. The individual in question told USU that if they moved forward with the lecture, that he would commit the deadliest school shooting in American history, and that it would be a Montreal-style massacre. The anonymous individual went by the alias of Mark Lepine. Mark Lepine infamously murdered 14 women in the 1989 École Polytechnique massacre in Montreal, and he did it under the guise of fighting feminism. Anita canceled her appearance at USU because the university wouldn't take additional security measures to ensure that she would be safe, and when I say additional safety measures, I'm talking about the fact that they were going to allow attendees to carry concealed firearms, and the reason why they could do this was because of Utah's open carry laws. It ultimately didn't matter anyway because USU determined that the threat wasn't credible and no further action was taken. Contrary to popular belief, Zoe and Anita were not the only women in video games that GamerGate supporters saw as their mortal enemies. On August 26, 2014, independent game developer Brianna Wu publicly mocked GamerGate on Twitter by snarkily replying to a sexist email that she received. Like Zoe and Anita before her, she received death threats, she was harassed, she was doxxed, and she was forced to flee from her home. GamerGate supporters even went as far as to send pictures of a mutilated dog to the corporate email of her development studio Giant Space Cat after she tweeted about her dog dying. Brianna was so paranoid that she legitimately believed that GamerGate supporters had somehow poisoned her dead dog, but she later realized that this wasn't the case. Brianna would receive 100 death threats over the course of 9 months, and she was so fed up with being attacked and harassed that she offered an $11,000 reward to the person that could find the individuals that were responsible for sending her death threats, and she set up a legal defense fund for women that were victims of GamerGate. The FBI investigated the threats that were made against Brianna and other women in video games, and identified 4 men that were responsible for sending the threats. They were able to get confessions from 2 of the men, with one of them saying that it was a joke and that he knew that sending a threatening communication to anyone was a federal crime and that he would never do it again. The U.S. Attorney's Office in Boston declined any sort of prosecution, and the FBI also declined to press any charges due to the fact that their San Francisco office had no jurisdiction in the state of Massachusetts, and they felt that they could not pursue charges locally. This infuriated Brianna for obvious reasons, and it convinced her that the FBI didn't actually care about the investigation. Anita put herself back into the spotlight by tweeting about Nintendo CEO Satoru Iwata, and blamed him for most of the misogyny in the video game industry, and she hoped that because of his death that Nintendo would move away from the male supremacy narrative that they had been forcing on its fanbase. Everything I just said was a complete lie, because those tweets turned out to be completely fake, or to be more technically accurate, GamerGate used the death of a beloved industry executive to tarnish the reputation of someone they didn't like. I don't even need to say how messed up that is, so I'm going to have someone do it for me.
Stop it. Get some help.
GamerGate didn't just go after high-profile women in video games, they went after the media as well. They created a coordinated email campaign called Operation Disrespectful Nod. The purpose of this campaign was to contact the advertisers of various video game websites in order to convince them to pull their ads from the sites that they were targeting. Their first target was Gama Sutra, who published an article written by Leigh Alexander titled "Gamers Don't Have to Be Your Audience, Gamers Are Over." Leigh essentially said that the industry no longer needed to exclusively cater to the gamer demographic, due to the fact that there was a broader mix of people playing video games. GamerGate supporters felt that this article completely disrespected them and the entire gaming community, so they decided to fight back by writing an email to Intel where they expressed their concerns about their ads appearing on Gama Sutra. In a surprising turn of events, Intel capitulated and pulled their ads from Gama Sutra. Intel would issue an apology where they stated that they were not taking sides in the GamerGate debate, and that they condemned any harassment by an organization or movement that discriminated against women. Gawker journalist Sam Biddle tweeted that GamerGate supporters were nerds that needed to be bullied and shamed into submission, and that bullying needed to be brought back. GamerGate supporters didn't take too kindly to these tweets, so they retaliated by contacting every advertiser that Gawker had, and as a result of these tweets, many of them pulled their ad money from Gawker. Gawker's editor-in-chief at the time, Max Reed, admitted that GamerGate cost Gawker over 7 figures in ad revenue, which for those of you that don't know, is $1 million. This coordinated attack was even more devastating due to the fact that Gawker Media was the parent company of Kotaku at the time. If you've been following along this entire time, then you know that there was a particular individual that is relevant to this story that was on the payroll when all of this was going down. In addition to GamerGate, there was a second hashtag called Not Your Shield. This was an initiative that was created by POC GamerGate supporters as a way to stop game journalists from using them as a shield to push their own agenda. I mention this as a way of saying that GamerGate supporters were not exclusively white or exclusively male. Typically, a story like this would stay in the intimate confines of the internet, but GamerGate did the impossible and went beyond the typical internet bubble. Several mainstream news outlets covered the story. Anita appeared on an episode of The Colbert Report to talk about GamerGate. John Oliver did a segment on his show, Last Week Tonight, about online harassment, which Zoe and Brianna were a part of. GamerGate supporters on 8chan did not hesitate to express how they felt about the British comedian. NBC aired an episode of Law & Order SVU titled Intimidation Game, which centered around a female game developer by the name of Raina Punjabi, who becomes a target for male gamers that don't like women in video games. She gets harassed, threatened, doxxed, and at one point she even gets swatted. She also gets subjected to a bunch of other horrible things by 3 of her biggest detractors, one of them being Logan Logan Paul. No, that's not a joke, he actually played one of the anonymous male gamers that were harassing and threatening Reina. While the episode gets some aspects of the GamerGate story right, there are others that are wildly off the mark, and the episode overall is a pretty mixed bag. I would get into why I believe Intimidation Game is a mixed bag, but I feel that deserves an entirely separate video of its own, so I'm not going to get into it here. The mainstream portrayals of GamerGate completely tarnished the movement's reputation and ruined any chance it ever had of being taken seriously by the general public. In the eyes of the mainstream media, and more importantly the victims, GamerGate wasn't a movement that was created to preserve and restore ethics in video game journalism. It was a coordinated harassment campaign against women in video games, and nobody could convince them otherwise. By this point, game developers had grown tired of the movement's antics and began to push back. The most high-profile game developer to call out GamerGate publicly was the founder of Double Fine Productions, Tim Schafer. During his opening monologue as the host of the 2015 Game Developers' Choice Awards, he openly mocked both GamerGate and Not Your Shield.
Every year, visual art for games becomes more and more complex. Whole teams are required to create assets for games that historically were made by a single artist. These days, it could take up to 8 people to make a single piece of armor. Oh! How many GamerGaters does it take to make a single piece of armor? Oh God, I don't know. 50. 1 to do the modeling, 1 to do the materials, and 40 to tweet that it's not your shield. Okay. Again, I cannot be blamed for what the puppet says.
This would turn out to be the last time GamerGate was even remotely relevant, as interest and discussion surrounding the movement would begin to slowly decline. I can't pinpoint the exact moment GamerGate died, it just sort of petered out. Like all internet trends and fads, it blew up far beyond anyone's expectations, and it was big for a little while, but eventually people lost interest in it, and before anyone knew it, it ended up getting relegated to the dustbins of internet history. There have been some attempts recently to create a GamerGate 2, but it hasn't been successful, and there are 2 key reasons for that. 1, sequels tend to be inferior to the original, and 2, the world, the internet, and society as a whole have moved on. GamerGate hasn't been relevant in nearly a decade, and there is nothing anyone can say or do that will bring it back into relevance. Even though GamerGate fell into complete and utter irrelevance after 2015, at least we still have ethics in video game journalism, am I right? Whenever GamerGate was criticized for its tactics, they would always say that they were fighting for ethics in video game journalism. The true motives of GamerGate have been fiercely debated for years, and now I feel that it's time to put this debate to bed once and for all. In order to figure out why GamerGate supporters believed in the whole ethics in video game journalism argument, we have to understand why they believed Zoe and Nathan were being unethical. Zoe Quinn was an indie game developer who was best known for creating the game Depression Quest, and she would have had a lot to gain from a media outlet like Kotaku, given her game a ton of positive press coverage. Nathan was a journalist that was working for Kotaku at the time, and he was briefly in a romantic relationship with her, which means that he would have had absolutely no incentive to write an honest review of the game because he was intimately involved with its creator. In the world of journalism, when you become intimately involved with the person that you're covering, you are supposed to recuse yourself. Failing to do so is not only a huge conflict of interest, it's also insanely unethical. GamerGate supporters believed that Nathan did not recuse himself and had reviewed Depression Quest for Kotaku without disclosing the fact that he had a romantic relationship with Zoe. On paper, the whole thing looked very suspicious, and the idea that a game journalist was allegedly trading sex for favors with the game developer was the biggest journalism red flag in the history of journalism red flags. But just because something looks suspicious doesn't mean that it always is. In order for GamerGate's ethics in video game journalism argument to be true, there has to be irrefutable evidence that Nathan reviewed Depression Quest for Kotaku without recusing himself, and this is where 19-year-old me and everyone else that vehemently believed that Zoe and Nathan were the biggest villains in the video game industry got the story oh so wrong. It turns out that the allegation that kickstarted this entire scandal never had any basis in reality. Nathan never reviewed Depression Quest, nor did anyone else at Kotaku for that matter. Kotaku's editor-in-chief at the time, Stephen Totillo, met with Nathan to discuss these allegations and had cleared him of any wrongdoing. I normally wouldn't give Kotaku the benefit of the doubt, but they were absolutely telling the truth in this instance. The official GamerGate wiki listed 2 examples of Nathan being unethical, but these were complete nothing burgers. The first article was titled Admission Quest, Valve Greenlights 50 More Games. As the name implies, it was about Depression Quest being added to Steam via its Greenlight program, alongside 49 other games. And the second article was titled The Indie Game Reality TV Show That Went to Hell, which was about how a reality show about an indie game jam went disastrously off the rails. While the article mentions Zoe and even includes a quote from her, it does not prove that Nathan was being unethical, and that is because it was an investigative article about a failed indie game jam reality show, and since Zoe was a part of that show, it made perfect sense for Nathan to ask Zoe about her thoughts on the whole ordeal and where she felt things had gone wrong. There was a third article that Nathan wrote that linked to 2 videos that don't exist anymore, where he had discussions with various game developers at GDC. Zoe Quinn just so happened to be one of them, and like the other 2 articles I just mentioned, this did not prove that Nathan was guilty in the court of ethical standards. The fact that Zoe filed a website domain for her very own game jam the day after that article was published is also not proof that Nathan was being unethical, because that was purely a matter of coincidence. One of the most important details that GamerGate supporters leave out of this story is the fact that Nathan stopped writing about Zoe after that article was published. He did what all ethical journalists are supposed to do. He recused himself when he became intimately involved with the person that he was covering. There's also the fact that the man that started all of this wrote an addendum at the beginning of the Zoe post where he admitted that he had no evidence to prove that Zoe and Nathan were trading sex for favors. It's important to mention that Aaron only accused Zoe of cheating on him with Nathan. He never said that they were doing the horizontal tango in order to ensure that Depression Quest would get positive coverage on Kotaku. The only reason a group of people would lie about a journalist violating ethical standards by allegedly sticking his token into the coin slot of an indie game developer is because they hated the female developer in question, but they couldn't be openly honest about their true intentions, so they came up with the convenient excuse of ethics in video game journalism due to the fact that Nathan was one of the 5 guys and just so happened to be a journalist. After all, you can't be accused of running a harassment campaign against a female game developer when you're preaching about ethics non-stop.
Really makes you think.
GamerGate's most fatal flaw was its dishonesty. GamerGate and the truth go together about as well as Jen Masterson and mushrooms. Gawker's former editor-in-chief, Max Reed, summed up the entire situation perfectly. That no positive review traded for sex ever actually appeared on Kotaku should tell you a lot about GamerGate's relationship to the truth. That GamerGaters believe this is how sex works should tell you a lot about the GamerGate demographic. But none of the specifics of the story really mattered, because ultimately Kotaku was being targeted less for specific ethical violations than for its critical coverage of the portrayal of women and minorities in video games and the sexism of the gaming community. The teenagers behind GamerGate were young, obsessive, deeply resentful of women, and had no sense of social boundaries, and now they finally had a rallying cry, ethics in journalism, and a common enemy, or really enemies, among them the developer in question, Zoe Quinn, and feminist media critic Anita Sarkeesian, who became the object of both sustained harassment and violent threats. In hindsight, we probably should have realized that GamerGate wasn't going to act in good faith, when one of its biggest supporters, Mundane Matt, was publicly encouraging people to falsely flag Anita Sarkeesian's videos a year earlier, purely because he didn't like her or her opinions regarding the treatment of women in video games. There's also the fact that the Not Your Shield hashtag was an astroturfing campaign created by 4chan to ironically shield GamerGate supporters from being criticized by those pesky social justice warriors. The complete and utter lack of self-awareness is not lost on me. Philippe Muchin infamously plagiarized his Dead Cells review from a YouTuber by the name of Boomstick Gaming when he was working at IGN. As a result of his unethical actions, he was fired by IGN and his entire career collapsed like a Jenga tower. If you wanted a clear-cut example of unethical video game journalism, then Philippe is the poster child. What Nathan Grayson did, or to be more technically accurate, didn't do, was not a clear-cut example of unethical video game journalism, and I hope that I've made that point crystal clear throughout this behemoth of a video. Simply disliking Zoe Quinn, Anita Sarkeesian, and Brianna Wu isn't wrong. Creating a false narrative to justify demonizing them simply because you don't like them is wrong. When Nintendo called the movement a harassment campaign, GamerGate supporters should have taken a step back and realized that they were not the good guys in this story, but that would have required honesty, empathy, self-reflection, and most importantly, self-awareness, and neither of those words were in their vocabulary. I cannot refer to GamerGate as anything other than a harassment campaign, because calling it a movement that was all about ethics in video game journalism is objectively a lie, and deep down inside, everybody knows that. But hey, that's just a theory. A GamerGate theory. Thanks for watching. What happened between Aaron and Zoe should have stayed between Aaron and Zoe. GamerGate would have never happened if Aaron had the decency and the maturity to deal with Zoe's infidelity privately. I want to make it abundantly clear that I do not condone cheating in any way, shape, or form, and it should go without saying that cheating on your significant other is an extremely shitty thing to do. Zoe was absolutely in the wrong for cheating on Aaron, but just because your ex-girlfriend cheats on you does not give you the right to publish the intimate details of their private sex life onto the internet for everybody to read. The world didn't need to know about the fact that Zoe Quinn cheated on their ex-boyfriend with 5 guys, and the world didn't need to know about the intimate details of their private sex life. But when your indie game developer ex-girlfriend cheats on you, the whole world just needs to know about it for some asinine reason. I don't blame Aaron for being angry and heartbroken, but I do blame him for the way that he went about it. When Zoe referred to Aaron as an openly malicious ex-boyfriend, they were absolutely telling the truth. The sole purpose of the Zoe post was to embarrass and humiliate Zoe. He was willing to put Zoe through hell on earth because he was angry, because he was heartbroken, and because he believed that he had been betrayed. He desperately wanted revenge, and the blog was simply the most devastating and explosive way to do that. Aaron took a private matter and turned it into an unnecessary public spectacle, and because of that, he deserves the most amount of blame for GamerGate. Because without his selfish, despicable, and malicious actions, GamerGate would have never existed at all. The only thing Zoe Quinn should have been known for is being a game developer. And because of Aaron's actions, they will never be known as strictly a game developer. They will forever be connected to this scandal. They will forever be seen as a victim. And that, my friends, is an absolute tragedy. And the fact that Aaron doesn't receive his fair share of blame for this unnecessary scandal is absolutely unfair. Because, in my opinion, regardless of how you feel about Zoe Quinn on a personal level, I think the one thing we can all agree on is that they do not deserve any of the things that happened to them throughout this entire ordeal. So, if you're looking for somebody to blame for GamerGate, Aaron should absolutely be at the top of the list. The whole thing was completely unnecessary, and because of him, we got saddled with this embarrassingly disastrous fiasco, and because of that, he should absolutely get the most amount of blame. Aaron isn't the only person to blame for why GamerGate turned out the way that it did. We have to acknowledge the fact that Zoe Quinn filed a false DMCA claim against Mundane Matt in order to get his video on them taken down. Look, Zoe Quinn is unquestionably the victim in all of this. But they also abused the DMCA system in order to get a video that was critical of them taken down. Both of these things can be true at the exact same time. If they had filed a privacy complaint and gotten the video taken down that way, they absolutely would have had a leg to stand on, because Matt did violate Zoe's privacy by talking about some of the contents of the Zoe post. But that's not why the video was taken down. It was taken down due to copyright, which made absolutely no sense because there was nothing in Mundane Matt's video that could be copyrighted. Not only did this make Zoe look terrible, from a perception standpoint, it gave their detractors more ammunition, and it added fuel to their growing belief that they were a shady and unethical person that had slept their way to the top of the video game industry and was now engaging in extreme damage control when their hands were caught in the cookie jar. Zoe would later write a book about their experiences with GamerGate and combating online hate called Crash Override. And nowhere in this book is the Mundane Matt false DMCA incident even mentioned. They refer to Mundane Matt in this book as Blue Skull Guy, probably because they didn't want to give him any attention, and nowhere in it do they say, no, I didn't falsely flag Blue Skull Guy's video, Blue Skull Guy is completely full of shit, and they didn't say, yeah, I did falsely flag Blue Skull Guy's video and this is why I did it. It's just straight up not even mentioned in the book, which is incredibly disappointing because I would have loved to have read their perspective on that entire incident. But it's just straight up, it's nowhere to be found. They don't mention it at all in the book. And that is a crying shame. Now, yes, I understand it's their book, so they could include and not include anything that they wanted to, but I honestly wanted it to be mentioned in the book just so I could hear their thoughts on it. And for whatever reason, they decided to just conveniently leave it out. If we are going to call out Aaron for essentially ruining Zoe's life by publishing the Zoe post, then we absolutely need to call out Zoe for filing a false DMCA claim against Mundane Matt when they damn well knew that their claims had absolutely no merit. After all, I'm all in the pursuit of things being fair. Video game journalists can also be blamed for GamerGate because they were the ones that decided to legitimize the flawed ideology of this movement by writing those stupid Gamers Are Dead articles. They essentially threw a stick of dynamite into a large crowd and watched the whole thing explode. They decided to poke the bear, and because of that mistake, we all ended up having to pay the price for it. And what made the whole thing even worse was that if you were completely out of the loop and you didn't know anything about GamerGate and you stumbled upon one of these articles, you might have come to the conclusion that they were attacking the gaming community as a whole, when in reality they were only attacking the individuals that were legitimately engaging in harassment against women in video games. Some people have said that if GamerGate supporters didn't overreact to Anita and Zoe, that they most likely would have faded into obscurity, and that same sentiment can be applied to video game journalism. If they didn't completely overreact and legitimize GamerGate by essentially giving it attention that it didn't deserve, and giving it free promotion by declaring that gamers were dead, GamerGate most likely would have fizzled out after a couple of weeks. This is what still astonishes me, even a decade later. GamerGate supporters by this point already believed that video game journalism was corrupt and unethical. So why on God's green earth would you give them ammunition to justify that belief? It literally makes no sense to me. The biggest mistake video game websites made, in my opinion, was dignifying this movement with a response. They should not have dignified this movement with a response. They shouldn't have said anything at all. Everybody knew that GamerGate's ideology was flawed. Everybody knew that they did not have any good intentions whatsoever. But by writing articles proclaiming that gamers were dead, they essentially gave the movement free promotion. They gave them an enemy. They gave them someone to root against. They gave them a reason to keep doing what they were doing. And that, in my opinion, was a huge mistake. GamerGate went on far longer than it should have, and that is because these video game websites completely overreacted when they decided to publish these articles, and because of that, I wholeheartedly believe that video game journalism more than deserves its fair share of the blame for this entire mess. And lastly, you can blame me for GamerGate, because over a decade ago I made 6 videos over the course of a week about GamerGate, back when it was called ZoeGate. Looking back on it now, I'm honestly embarrassed that I even made those videos in the first place, and I'm embarrassed that I believed that GamerGate were the good guys in this whole story. I take full responsibility for those videos because I consciously chose to make them, and I chose to do so because I genuinely believed that Zoe and Nathan were the villains in this story. Making this video over a decade later has made me realize how big of an idiot I was back then. I was 19, and I should have known better. I should have researched. I should have fact-checked, and because I didn't do either of those things, I contributed to the most unnecessary scandal in the history of scandals. If I knew what I know now, back then, my stance on GamerGate would have been drastically different. Given the stance that I've taken in this video, I obviously no longer stand behind the opinions and viewpoints I expressed in the 6 videos I made back in 2014, and I am well aware of the fact that GamerGate were the villains in this entire story. And I also want to make it abundantly clear that I do not stand behind those 6 videos anymore. And I haven't for years, but making this video has made me realize that I should be open and honest about that fact, because if I'm going to blame other people for the role they played in GamerGate, it made sense to blame myself because I contributed to this whole mess, and I deserve to be held accountable just as much as anyone else. The point I'm trying to make here is that GamerGate was not the fault of a single group or a single person. This was a disaster that everybody was responsible for creating. GamerGate was a war that nobody won, and everybody lost, and I sincerely hope we never have to go through anything like it ever again. And for those of you that are desperately trying to make GamerGate 2 a thing, stop it. No, seriously, just stop it. Your attempts to try and make GamerGate 2 happen are like Gretchen trying to make Fetch happen. It's never going to happen. GamerGate was an unfortunate incident that happened in the past, and it needs to stay in the past where it rightfully belongs. With all that being said, it's finally time to bring this behemoth of a video to a close. This is ThatKidDouglas, aka The Unhero, signing out. Deuces. And until next time, remember to stay frosty and keep it weird.
Come on, Luigi, let's go to the park. Look, Luigi, it's the Bridge of Awesome. Let's cross it to reach the castle.
Hey, when are we going to the pizzeria?
About that note! Bowser was here. Oh my god. He sent a letter. He said he's going to take over the world using his 7 Koopa salami. He assures us it's going to be pure awesome. P.S. Mario is a loser.
In our last video, we discussed the concept of sexual objectification and looked at a specific subset of non-essential female characters, which I classify as non-playable sex objects. In this episode, we will expand our discussion of the women as background decoration trope to examine how sexualized female bodies often occupy a dual role as both sexual playthings and the perpetual victims of male violence.
Crap.